Curious as to why some M&As are successful while others fail? The company may get acquired, but a few months down the line, they crash and burn. Dave Sobel, the host of the Business of Tech podcast and MSP Radio, sits down with Avetis to uncover his best do's and don'ts when performing M&A in the tech industry. Let's dive in.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Tech Leaders Playbook. Today, my guest is Dave Sobel. Dave, I am super excited to have you on board. Not only is Dave a very successful, outspoken leader in our industry, but he also has his own very successful podcast. Dave, welcome aboard and thank you for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me. Super excited for this conversation today.
I am as well, Dave. I think you and I connected about a month and a half ago before my trip to Europe, and we connected about a lot of different things in tech. And so I always love to hear people's stories. Like, walk us through your early days. Tell us about your career and how it led to where you are now.
Yeah, so it's funny because you can always start from the beginning, right? Well, I was born in a hospital, but the actual bit that's interesting is to start right around graduation, right? So I graduated with a degree in computer science from William and Mary here in Virginia. And, if you'd asked college Dave, I would have thought my career would be a programmer, product person. Like you would have, that's kind of where I thought things would go. But my first kind of two late 90s startups were a consulting firm and a product place, right? And they were great late 90s tech startup kind of stuff, all enthusiasm and direction. And both of them crashed into the wall, right? Which is a little bit of that, the lessons from that time. And the second one, I was the lead product person. We got it all out. And when as they were shutting things down, they laid off all the technical team, but kept sales and management. And the lesson I sort of took away from that was, the business leaders are the ones whose jobs are protected. But I'm smarter than those numbnuts. I can run a company into a wall just as easily as they can.
Oh, yeah. Maybe better, Dave.
So take that bravado and off I launched my first. And I had a critical decision point at that point, which was, do I go into product or did I go into services? And I actually decided I started into services because, again, younger and less knowledgeable, I thought that was the easier path. And so I launched a services business focused on delivering technology services for small to mid-sized organizations, helping them with their technology. Now we'd call that a managed services provider or an IT outsourcer. But back then, in the early 2000s, it was all just sort of coming together. And that was my first business.
Nice. Dave, tell me this is a weird question, but what did those wonderful folks do to drive the business to the ground? Because we could all learn from that, right? Because a lot of the folks are either tech leaders in my my audience, or they're entrepreneurs that own their own businesses.
Yeah, so the first company was too much about the technology and not about business outcomes, right? So it was all about being smart consultants and not enough about making that relevant for business. We did some cool projects. I mean, I did early e-commerce stuff, made-to-order plastic delivery stuff. Nice. That business got bought by GE Plastics when we helped them with their website. We did some really cool domain name service, consult, all kinds of cool stuff, but we weren't great at tying that back to business outcomes in the first business. And the second one was all about market timing. That one was, was a good idea. We were in the pharmaceutical contracting space, helping bring large pharmaceuticals together and do e-commerce and do their negotiations online. But it was way too early. They just were not ready for that. And so the salespeople couldn't sell it and couldn't get it into enough of the right people. We had one big first trial customer, but when it didn't get any legs, we stuck around at that a little too long.
Have you seen companies win from that? Have you seen, because first mover advantage is not always a thing. Sometimes it is too early. Have you seen companies, I'm going way back, right? Have you seen companies do what that second company did and succeed based on better timing?
Not particularly. Like I think it was so early, and in particular, I mean, only now are we starting to see some of the problems that we were addressing in terms of smart contracts and the ability to make that fully electronic become realized. We had really early ideas on the way that was all going to be done 20 years ago. and only now are we even starting to see the bits of that. I think if I was to launch that kind of company now, the pieces are much more in place. But we were dealing also with really large incumbents that are very slow to move.
Got it. That's Dave, that right there, we already have a lesson, right? Because when I invest in startups, yes, I want to see a great technology and a great technologist founder, but I want to see either a co-founder or a really, really great sales hire, because you can build an incredible company, but if you can't sell that product, no one's ever going to see it, right? And no one's going to ever understand it or buy it, and you're never going to be able to raise the type of money you need to see real traction. The part that's really tough to put a lesson to is the timing game. That's a really tough one. Any thoughts on that?
You got to try. Right? It's the element there for me is about you've got to identify more than just one customer that may be your buyer, and not just this vagary of like a whole large market space. In fact, I usually get turned off by people that tell me their market opportunity is essentially everybody or is close to it. I want you to be as specific as possible and narrow that down so that you know exactly the buyer profile. And when you can do a good job of identifying that, you've actually probably told me that you're good on the timing because you know the kind of people that'll do it. And if you're sort of hand waving and trying to gloss that over, you're missing a piece of the battle for me.
So no global $100 billion TAMs, right? We need a very small, narrow.
Yeah, small and narrow. Because by the way, small and narrow usually is a little bit complicated and thus profitable. Like, I like hard problems. That's where money is to be made. If it's a sort of like, well, everyone will buy this. Actually, no one will buy that.
Good point. If you're all things to all people, then you're nothing, right? You have nothing for the folks that actually need you. Or
maybe playing in a commoditized market, right? I get really worried when it's something like, well, of course everyone will have that. Well, why doesn't everyone have that now? Like, there's just all kinds of concerns when it's that big. And everyone likes the really big examples, right? Like they always come like, well, everyone wants one of the really big tech companies. It's like, well, yeah, assume you're not that.
Yeah. No, that's great. David, tell me a little bit more about the MSP world, and when is it the right time for companies to implement it or have an MSP provider? Tell me a little bit about your world.
Yeah, it's a fun, diverse, weird world that is generally small business, right? And I tend to I'm a small entrepreneur. I am not the kind of person that loves working in businesses that are super practical, that build people much more than necessarily. I don't need it to be $100 million or $1 billion business. Most businesses aren't that. In fact, 86% of the managed services provider world does less than $10 million in revenue.
Wow.
It's a small space. I always describe to anybody who's interested in this space, spend the next 2 weeks asking every business you work with who helps with your technology.
Okay.
Ask your lawyer, ask your dentist, ask your doctor, ask the guy who works on your car, ask who helps with your technology, and you will get exposure to the managed services world. Because we talk about all businesses being technology businesses. Well, somebody has to help them, right? So these are generally small consulting organizations that are generally engaging on an ongoing basis. The idea behind managed services is that they'll come in and they'll deliver a set of services to keep that technology engaged, functioning, secure, all of the bits, and generally delivered on a monthly recurring basis through some kind of contract mechanism, right? If you're trying to engage with somebody, it's best done on a recurring basis. All of us in business know we like recurring revenue businesses, right? They're good kind of customer retention business. So it's a hybrid of doing services, but also doing it in that contractual way.
Love it. What is a type of company, a use case of yours that drives you crazy because they're the ones that need it the most? They're the ones you can help the most, yet they refuse the services because it's costly. Tell me a little bit about what your thoughts on that.
Oh, there are so many of these because it's oftentimes people that are just looking at saying, well, we just need to barely keep the computers alive. And any of us who played in the managed services world who deal with kind of real difficult businesses know the little mom and pop where the computers are sitting on the floor, they're a little too old, they're a little too dusty, and then they're complaining that everything is running slowly and they're not able to get their work done. Well, yeah, because you've spent no time or energy investing in this stuff. No wonder it doesn't work very well. And you haven't unlocked any of the possibilities. But more importantly, you've always viewed it as an expense, not as an investment. Technology is an investment. When you do it right, I'm going to spend $1 to get $1.25. Like
Wow.
I'm going to get enablement of a way that I'm doing it. But when I do it right, by actually making sure my systems are processing well, and I've taken inefficiencies out of the system, ideally connecting it to some kind of e-commerce for whatever that means for your business, doing, proper data protection so that I'm not actually having to spend money on ransomware and all that extra garbage, not having to worry about extortion, like all of doing that right, it takes discipline and time.
And money and resources and the right
Yeah.
ones.
Well, but again, I look at it and say it does take money. But again, any business owner will tell you you'll spend $1 to get $1.25. If the technology is a proper investment, it can be absolutely linked back to the core mission and drive of whatever business you're serving. If it's a doctor, I want to make sure you're serving your patients efficiently, maximizing your time, not being wasteful. You're a lawyer, making sure that the information is available quickly so that you can serve more customers, deliver more billable hours. If you're selling widgets, whatever the widgets are, I want to make sure that the technology helps you sell 10% more widgets or opens up the market to new opportunities. Like maybe you go, not just local, but you're going national, like you're able to sell online. Like whatever that is, we should be able to link the technology back to whatever business mission you've got.
And you do that through connecting, I'm guessing, with different partner companies as well.
Well, so when I was an MSP, like the idea really is you go deep with your customers. You've got to be a business partner, and you've got to understand what they do and how they do it, and you've got to understand the intricacies of their business. And there's a lot of sort of business consulting that goes along with that, so that you're then tying it all together to deliver technology solutions. Now, by the way, there's some baseline stuff that always has to be done, right? We've got to make sure you've got proper internet connection, that your data is retained very well and backed up and managed. We've got to make sure everyone's these days has basic systems like email and the component and document management. There's a lot of this stuff that's component, but then it gets layered on with the really valuable stuff, which is working with you on your business productivity layer, whatever that means to your business.
Nice. Over your career, long career, you work with, worked at Level Platforms, SolarWinds, big vendors, right, in this space. What shifts have you observed in kind of the vendor consulting landscape over the last few years, especially?
It's really fascinating to watch as many of those vendors have become more and more mature. And they grew a lot faster, particularly than the people that they were serving. So again, back to my sort of statement, 86% of this market is doing less than $10 million in business. A lot of the software vendors that are serving it have gotten much larger than that. But they grew up alongside them. Right. So if we go back really far, right, you get companies like Microsoft, who are a key part of what this space does. Of course, they're massive, right? But even the businesses around them have also gotten to be really large size. I worked for SolarWinds for a while, particularly in their MSP group. But we came up through acquisition, right? I started with a little company called GFI. We were 500 people when I came on. By the time the acquisition and merged in with other stuff and rolled up, when I left SolarWinds was 3,200 people.
Wow.
That is a much larger organization than the people that we're serving. And, there's certainly value in scale, right? And obviously to the owners and all of the bits that come from the money-making side. But there's obviously benefits in terms of business operations at scale. But when you are a little bit different from your customers, and in particular that transition from founder-led to organizationally led, you do have to work harder on the translation between what founder-led organizations are looking for versus that organizational structure-led organizations are.
It sounds like that you kind of distance yourself as a company as you scale from understanding the problems of these small businesses. Is kind of what you're getting to, right?
Or you have to be much more systematic about it because one of the things that's interesting, I love playing with founder-led companies, right? Because they look a lot like me, they feel a lot like me, but they're also you get a certain benefit of just dealing with other founders, and two founders talking automatically feel like very similar because they share some of the same struggles. But when you do get to a certain size and scale, you've systemized a lot. That's great. You've brought in lots of specialists. You have a management team, but you oftentimes you're exactly right, have lost some of that touch. So it isn't instinctual. Now, good organizations will invest there so that they make sure that they have a system to address that and people that are devoted to that and an investment in valuing that. But where we find the risk is the ones that have sort of wandered from that and lost touch with, the customers themselves.
Dave, you mentioned it sounds like you've been through a few M&A activities. Can you tell me a little bit about that? And where were you? Were you selling? Were you acquiring? Tell me a little bit about those two sides.
I've done a bunch of it. So even back to when I was an MSP, we acquired another MSP.
Okay.
It was a freaking disaster. I made all the mistakes. I did such a horrible job on due diligence and made a ton of mistakes. But then I had the opportunity. I sold my MSP too. So I sold to another MSP, and I took all the lessons, the screw ups of the acquisition, and I did it right when I sold.
Even that was an investment.
Oh, totally. You got to learn all the way. Every single time, you got to learn from your mistakes, pick yourself up, and try again.
What were some of the lessons? What were some of the screw ups, and what were the lessons?
Actually,
next time around?
The biggest one was just not spending enough time on the people side of things, which was ultimately everyone looks at these M&A deals and they talk so much about the Excel side of things, right? Like the contracts, the math.
Yep.
Yeah, how it all works on paper, right? Like, and that's where everyone does this. But ultimately, the make or break on M&A is about the people and the culture. If you can't bring the people together and integrate two disparate organizations to become one organization, and I don't care how you describe this, it's a new thing on the other side. It is probably there's always an acquirer, right? And then there's always, regardless of whatever they say about two equals, there's always somebody on top.
Oh yeah.
But the new thing that's created is always new. It's always a little bit different. And so you've got to make sure that you're bringing all of the right stuff together from both orgs, the value that you're acquiring and retaining all of the stuff that made you good before. And this is all people and culture. All of that.
Huge.
All of my mistakes boil down to that. You ask what I screwed up. Like, I spent way too much time worrying about the contracts and the numbers and making all the math work on this. And I didn't spend nearly enough time making sure that the people that I was onboarding were cultural fits, that they actually were correct people to fit into slots that were built for them, that they were comfortable in, that they were empowered to leverage, that I was acquiring the right people, and that I didn't disrupt my existing organizations by the change that were happening. And I screwed all of that up and I made a mess of things.
And Dave, that's a very complex thing to wrangle, first of all. So I don't blame you for screwing that up. And you're absolutely right. When you hear M&A attorneys, which I've had on my show, or you read books, it's all about the numbers, getting the deal right, making sure you don't get screwed either side. And maybe even
that's the easy bit. That's
right?
The easy
it
bit.
Sounds like it. I mean, honestly, up until this point, I've seen my companies get acquired, but that was when I was on the corporate side and I wasn't really a big enough player to matter as a senior director or whatever. But thinking about acquiring other companies, that's a lesson for me right there. Because you're right, people focus. All my think tank groups, they always focus on getting the deal right. I've never heard the cultural stuff come up. That's actually a really great point. So it's important for you to, especially if you're acquiring this company for its people, for the knowledge base. If you screw that up, you've bought nothing. Maybe you've bought some contracts.
It'll all disintegrate around you, or you'll make a mess. You'll start slowing down your own operations. Your own people will start your teams will be distracted with the integration, the new culture, the HR, the integrations, all of that stuff. I mean, I smile and go like, of course the lawyers say how important it is, but you know what that happens on the first day of the acquisition? They're all gone.
Yep,
They're not the ones there doing the work of pulling the two organizations together, and that's where the rubber meets the road. It's all successful there.
Really good.
And by the way, this is also why in some cases in larger deals they operate very independently, right? You may own it in larger deals. They'll buy somebody, but it's a wholly owned subsidiary and it's left alone. Like, that's an intentional choice to not take on that work.
Very smart.
That's cool, but that's a strategy to mitigate that, but you still have to manage that, right? You still have to have the communications between the two organizations, and you got to have the alignment and the value if you're going to try to grow together.
My favorite, Dave, is now I see press releases that come from my client success managers, and they're like, "Hey, I think our client is now partnered with this one company." And I read the press release, and it's very confusing. And at the end of the day, I'm like, that's an acquisition.
Right.
They just acquired that company. They acquired our client or vice versa, but they make it look like it's a partnership and that it's not an acquisition. I don't know why, but I'm seeing more and more of this partnership scenario play out. It's usually a minority cap or something like that, right? There's an acquisition of a piece of the company. We kind of covered that, but I want to be really specific. If you can give us 3 really, really, really important steps we need to take when we approach integrating a newly acquired company, particularly in the tech space or tech services or whatever you want to call. Give us three main things you would do, day one or whatever.
People. I mean, I kind of have to laugh and go like, so I would spend, for me, like, don't get me wrong. I think it's important to make sure that the deal makes sense. You're only going to do it when it makes financial sense, when the 1 + 1 really is 3. You've got to do that math to make sure that makes sense.
We got that covered. We got the covered with our attorneys and all of our friends and all the knowledge. Great.
Right. So now how are you going to deal with the people?
Yeah.
And I really, so you asked for 3? No, it's 1. Like, how are we going to pull the people together? What does the new structure look? How are people empowered? Are they clear on their mission? You're going to over-communicate on what we're doing together and why. What the end state looks like, how we're going to get there together, how we're going to leverage those pieces. For me, the ones that I've found, that I've been involved with or also analyzed, where the leaders lean into that communication are the ones that end up proving to be successful. Because it's hard, and in the absence of information, people will fill it in, and it's oftentimes with a more negative version that does not align with your vision. And so for me, it really is about building out that integration plan that focuses on people. When I sold my MSP, and again, small deal, right? So this is not massive organizations coming together. This is all in that small business kind of space. We went full open kimono on everything from the beginning. No secrets, even before the deal. Well, only when we were in the portion of just doing disclosures, it just became, we're going to just go full kimono. You can know everything you need to know about the organization, all the financials, all the details, all the people. We're going to have detailed discussion about who the people are, what they bring to the organization, how they're valuable, how they're not, and we're going to talk about what the integration plans would look like as part of the deal. We discussed that as part of the deal integration. Who would be the kinds of people that they were looking for when they finished it out? Who would be getting jobs as part of that? Who would not? Why they were not a good fit? They had an opportunity to talk to everybody. And people look at me funny when I'm like, yeah, of course I did, because I wanted it to work. The value of the deal, particularly in my case, which had some payout component to it, in order to hit those numbers, it had to be successful. So we had to go really detailed into all of those pieces.
Dave, 3 things I was thinking as you were talking about this stuff is, 1, you talked about transparency. Huge. You're right. Most people don't know anything, and it's, our staff starts creating their own illusions of what's happening. So I love transparency. Communicate. During COVID, during that kind of recession, and during this existing recession, I've been incredibly open and transparent with my staff, and it's created so much trust and no worries of what's going to happen, because they know what's about to happen. I always tell them what I'm thinking is going to happen and how we're going to be okay and how we're going to deal with it. And I always follow through with the same mechanics, and it's really created a trusting organization. So I love that. 2, you talked about the mission. What hit me is you talked about a mission, but there's 2 missions have now merged, and your mission for your organization might have nothing to do with the acquiring or acquired company. So understanding their mission and speaking their language is extremely important. 3, on my recruiting side of our business, one of the main reasons people leave jobs is, hey, my company was just acquired and culture has changed and we can see layoffs coming. So again, lack of transparency, lack of trust, lack of knowing what's happening has created the worst of it, which is people thinking their jobs are on the line. So they leave, even though their jobs might not be on the line. In fact, maybe they've had incredible opportunities for promotions and more opportunities and growth to be part of something better, but they're not thinking about those things. They're thinking about, I used to like my mission and culture and, colleagues and manager, and now that's
And then
changing.
it changed.
It's time to move on. So I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that. You've pretty much covered it already.
Oh, you've totally hit the nail on the head, and that's the way that I think about it. And by the way, when I look at M&As, I talk about that stuff way more important because that's where the rubber hits the road. I care about the deal, a year, 2 year, 3 years later. It's that's where I want to see if it's successful.
Oh.
And by the way, I will always celebrate an entrepreneur and exit, right? Like at the moment of those kinds of things. But by the way, a lot of times the entrepreneurs are out the door. They take their money and they run out the side door, and good for them. And I applaud them in selling the asset. But if I want to judge the success of it, I need to look at it 2 or 3 years later and see what the combined entity has done post-acquisition.
Nice. Love that. What inspired you to start the Business of Tech podcast?
It's a funny little story. So I had my 10 years running MSPs, and then I worked for, as you mentioned, I worked for a couple of software vendors. It was another 8-year run with a couple of different vendors going through that process. We delivered software to the MSPs and helped them run their business. And so I'd spent a lot of time both delivering the services directly and building products and involved with the building of products that helped them. And I looked and I said, I think where I can spend my time is on the bit that I've always been pretty good at, which is looking at trends and looking at what's going on in the market and identifying what matters and what doesn't for those that is important. Like, which are the bits that are going to be something and which are the ones that are not, particularly to the vast majority, right? And what I mean by that is like the typical small business clients that we talk about. Nice. We in tech love every flashy new thing, but you know what? Most of them don't matter. They just don't. They just aren't a thing. And you have to take a good discerning eye at that. And I sort of said, I think I can take that ability that I've got, a pretty reasonably good sense of the ones that matter to customers and the ones that don't. And I can apply that to the news. I can start delivering insights to those MSPs and IT services companies going, all right, this is the stuff that's happened in the last day or 2 or 3 or 4, or the last couple of days. And I'm going to analyze them and I'm going to say, these are the things that I thought were important. And in every segment, I do a piece called Why Do We Care? Which is to take those stories and I then say, this is why I picked it, or what I think is important, or what I'm getting out of that story and what I think the opportunity is. For example, I like to talk about AI, right? And I've been talking about a ton of AI recently. But I'm also looking at it saying, okay, I think these use cases are interesting because here's why, and I can tie this back to business outcomes, and here's noise. This is noise. I can't tie it back to a business outcome, so I think that's one to ignore. And I think that curation has some value. And I also don't mind saying, I'd been on the vendor side for a little while, and I understood what this audience wanted to hear, and I saw the business opportunity to address that with those insights and monetize, sell some ads to those audience, and people would listen.
Dave, you took the words right out of my mouth. The fancy, shiny toy right now is AI. Everyone's looking at it, and it's no longer about big tech companies who are AI companies. Now we all feel the pressure. You've got a little bit of FOMO if you don't inject AI into your company. Tell me, you said something brilliant. You said sometimes they just don't matter. Tell us where it should matter to not a mom and pop, but a growing but smaller business, and what should they do with AI right now? What should they be looking at? What should they be researching? Not overreacting and spending a bunch of money on something that may not matter, but what does matter, and what should we all be doing to make sure we stay relevant, we stay ahead of the game a little bit without losing focus on what really matters, which is our day-to-day business, our staff members, our clients, and of course, our families.
Right. I love this space because it's exciting and it's a technology that I can actually see use cases really fast. The reason I got super excited by what was happening was, I like everybody else, I watched ChatGPT, but what I was really interested in was the quick user growth and the high retention of those users. For me, that was the quick thing. Right, was okay, now I can see that people are using this practically in the field. And that started circling, okay, where is this being used? And what I'm finding is that the philosophy that seems to be working best in both the use cases and my approach to it is thinking, I don't think AI is going to replace people's jobs. I think people might be replaced by those who understand AI. I don't think you can use AI and take someone who has no experience and give them AI and instantly they are a guru and useful in that job. But I think you can take people that have skills and you can amplify those skills by injecting artificial intelligence into it. So, for example, the most interesting study I've seen recently, and I covered this on my show, was the increase in positive outcomes for radiologists using AI to find cancer in cancer patients. They saw a 20% uplift in the discovery of cancer in those studies.
Interesting.
You can't tell me that's not an incredibly compelling business reason.
That is amazing.
We can arm radiologists with this kind of technology. We can help them find faster and more reliably than humans on their own.
Great.
I love that. So,
I love it as well.
So we're looking for things that do that. I look and say, like, these people that are taking marketing copy and just having the machines generate it. So you've just created bad generic marketing copy. But what I can do is I can take writers and I can give them an infinite capacity writing partner to work with that they can bounce ideas off of, that they can create first drafts, that they can create versions of their content that they can mold much faster.
Agreed.
That increases output and they can do much better job applying their own skills to it. And so you start looking at that and you can take each of the various industries that you work with and say, how can we do that? So, for example, with lawyers, right? Let's help them have not only their army of paralegals, but an infinite capacity paralegal that has all of the information that they've ever worked with that can also answer questions and get them information faster. And everyone everyone smiles and goes, well, you still have to fact check. Yeah, you've always had to fact check. Anybody that does their job correctly has always had to fact check it. What we're talking about is getting from first draft to initial to second draft and third draft faster so that we can produce more. So we can do it with doctors, we can do it with lawyers, we can do it with technicians. We can make sure that the infinite capacity advisor is available with all of their service manuals and they have access to that stuff. And you can apply it to all of the various industries and accelerate people. And those are the use cases that I'm looking for. It's why I love this space right now, by the way, is because it's exactly what I talked about in terms of service providers helping their customers with technology. It's kind of customized. You kind of have to do it bespoke to an organization, and that's awesome for complexity and for a profitable business.
I agree. I think one of the biggest things I've seen for my business is getting small tasks off the ground faster. That's it. For example, I write for Inc., Entrepreneur, and now Forbes Technology Council. And one of the biggest things I've always struggled with, unfortunately, I haven't used this tool yet, is getting things off the ground, right? And if I have something that's just there for me to start with, and even if I edit the thing and it ends up being nothing like it started, it gave me something to work with versus writer's block where you're staring at something. Like creating a job description from scratch. My team used to really struggle with that. It'd take them a week to create something simple. I'm like, come on, we're hiring an admin assistant, guys. Come on, it's not that hard. But now they can create that in half an hour or half a second, frankly, edit it, play with it. Hey, is this pretty good? Yes, no, change it up. Boom, it's ready to go. And we can get that off the ground. I think that's where I see value. And that's created zero want for me to reduce my staff. Zero. It's just the people doing it are able to do simple tasks like this they don't love doing faster, getting it off the ground and making an impact on our business. So I agree with you. At least not yet. It won't replace us. Maybe in 5-10 years, we'll see.
Anything 5 or 10 years out, the crystal ball is cracked and gray and not perfect. Let's not worry so much about that. Now, I will always say, like, I want to think about it in large societal terms. Like, I want to have conversations about that and the impact to the way it might change the workforce and what we as society should do. And I think we should have healthy conversations about that. But in terms of business applications, those two are two separate conversations.
Agreed. Tell us a little bit about your book. You had somehow the time to write the book, Virtualization Defined. What's it all about? What's the intended audience, and how the hell did you find time to do it?
Yeah. So this was during my MSP days. When as we were moving towards the cloud, there was a lot of interest in virtualization, and for me, it was again a flashy technical subject that I was interested in, had spent a bunch of time doing and implementing with customers, but too often I didn't hear enough of why would we do it and what were the business reasons to do it. And so I sat down and I iterated over time with working with my own customer base to come up with examples and what I thought it would be, and I outlined in my book a bunch of ways of applying it, and it was focused again on the small business consultant who was looking at that technology, particularly at the time, and the way they wanted to apply it. And now I would take that kind of content and I'd be creating videos and I'd be creating much more micro content, but at the time I wanted to sit down and write a book about it, and so that was the way that I approached it.
Weird question, but you might have some insight on it. Just months ago, everybody was talking about diversity and inclusion and all this, and it seems like no one's talking about it, which is surprising. What does the data say about diversity among leadership of IT services company? What are you seeing out there?
Yeah, I do it. So on the podcast, we continue to do a quarterly survey where we actually go out and we look at all the websites of about 300 and some companies and look at just about 4,000 individuals across technology companies to do an analysis to try and understand what's going on from a diversity perspective. And what we're finding is that it's not really changing. That the market is pretty consistent in terms of the way that it breaks down. It's less than 2% black. It's about roughly 20% female. And no matter how we slice and dice it, it doesn't really change. The only thing that we can sort of see from a difference is larger publicly traded companies tend to be slightly more diverse. They can get up as high as sort of 25% female in terms of their representation, but it's not changing dramatically. And for me, the interesting thing is I always like to tie this back to business outcomes, and I keep finding more and more research over the past 4 years we've been looking at this and 3 years we've been doing the data, where anytime we make investments in diversity, those companies outperform.
Of course.
We say of course, it's data-driven, but I look at this from a data-driven perspective. All of the research says that the organizations that do that will have a 10 to 15% uplift in terms of their profitability, their growth. Like, there's all kinds of reasons to do it. Yet they aren't doing it, right? And that's the interesting sort of dichotomy of this is if I told you, hey, you do this thing and you'll drop 10 to 15% to your bottom line, I would like to think most business owners would do it. And so I keep highlighting it because I think this is an opportunity not only to do something that for me is the right thing to do, but it also then you are better communicating to your customers because you represent them more. You have different viewpoints that then allow you to serve larger customers. Oh, and by the way, the data then drives you to a better outcome for your business.
Love it, Dave. And that's my favorite. I think people do it for the wrong reasons, and they don't get the kind of ROI that they're looking for because they're not doing it for the right reasons, which means it's not sustainable, which means it's not real. You have to do it for the right reasons. What a great way to end it. Guys, go out, get yourself a lot more diverse. You will love it. First of all, you're going to love your culture because it's diverse and it represents the world we live in. You'll have a lot more fun, and frankly, the data says it drives profitability, which is frankly what businesses are looking for. Dave, you've been incredible. We're out of time, and I've really enjoyed having you. We should do this more often. Anything you want to leave us with?
Oh, anytime. I'd love to come back. If people are looking for what I'm up to, please catch me on the Business of Tech podcast. It's 5 to 6 minutes a day, and we cover stories and ask the question, why do we care? It's easy to find on any of the podcast platforms.
I love it, Dave. See you soon.
Thanks for having me.
Bye, everybody. And that brings us to the end of another great episode of the Tech Leaders Playbook. I want to thank you for joining us and hope you took away some valuable insights to apply in your professional journey. Don't forget to subscribe on your preferred podcast platform so you don't miss out on the next great conversation. I promise it'll be good. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd appreciate if you could leave us a review. Your feedback not only helps us improve, but it also helps others discover the podcast. Better leaders mean better working environments. Better working environments leads to happier people. I'm Avetis Antaplyan, and this has been the Tech Leaders Playbook. Keep leading, keep learning, keep giving, and I'll see you on the next one. Until then, stay inspired, my friends.